The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona Territory, as Prudence Fairchild stepped off the stagecoach, her face carefully hidden behind a heavy veil that fell from her bonnet. The year was 1882, and the mining boomtown bustled with activity despite the late hour, the sounds of piano music and raucous laughter spilling from the saloons that lined Allen Street. "Madam, your luggage," the stagecoach driver called, holding out her single-worn carpetbag. Prudence reached for it quickly, keeping her head down, her gloved fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the handle. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the street noise. "You need directions to somewhere." "The Crystal Palace has rooms for ladies," he offered, his kind eyes trying to peer through the thick, dark veil that completely obscured her features. "No, thank you, I have arrangements." The lie came easily to her lips. In truth, she had nowhere to go, but she'd learned long ago that revealing vulnerability invited predators. Her entire journey from Boston had been made on carefully hoarded savings and desperate prayers. As she moved away from the stagecoach, Prudence kept her head down, navigating the boardwalk with careful steps. Tombstone was not what she had imagined. Despite its notorious reputation, the town had an air of surprising permanence. Brick buildings stood alongside wooden structures. Oil lamps illuminated the streets, and ladies in fine dresses walked arm in arm with gentlemen. She had come west because no one knew her here. No one would recognize the once celebrated beauty of Boston society, now transformed by tragedy and fire. Here, she could be anonymous behind her veil, perhaps find work where her appearance wouldn't matter. She had skills she could read and write, keep accounts, and sew finely. Surely in a frontier town, such abilities would be valued over beauty. The Silver Nugget Hotel stood at the corner, its windows glowing warmly against the deepening twilight. Gathering her courage, Prudence approached the entrance, her carpetbag clutched tightly to her chest. "Good evening," she said softly to the clerk behind the desk, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. "I require a room, please, the most modest you have available." The clerk looked up, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the heavily veiled woman. "Of course, madam. That'll be 50 cents a night in advance." Prudence carefully counted out the coins, painfully aware that her funds were dwindling rapidly. "Thank you. How long might I stay for this amount?" "That'll get you 3 nights, madam, 3 nights. 72 hours to find employment and a more permanent situation." "That will be sufficient," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "Room 3, top of the stairs, first door on your right. Do you have any other luggage coming?" "No, this is all." She took the key he offered, their fingers never touching. "Dining room opens at 6 in the morning if you're wanting breakfast," he added. "Extra 15 cents. Prudence nodded and turned toward the stairs, feeling the weight of the clerk's curious gaze upon her back. The stairs creaked beneath her feet as she climbed, her body aching from the long journey. The room, when she unlocked it, was Spartan but clean: a narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, a small table with a single chair, and a window that overlooked the busy street below. She set down her bag and locked the door, then moved to the window, watching the people below. Men in dusty trail clothes mingled with miners fresh from their claims. Women in gaudy dresses stood in doorways of saloons, calling out to passing cowboys. A group of Chinese workers hurried past, heads down, avoiding the sneers of drunken prospectors. Across the street stood a building with a sign that read, "Territorial Newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph." Perhaps there, she might find work. With trembling fingers, Prudence finally removed her bonnet and veil, allowing herself to breathe freely for the first time in hours. The mirror above the washstand reflected her face in the dim lamplight, once flawlessly beautiful. Now a landscape of puckered, angry scars that covered the right side from temple to jaw. The fire that had claimed her family home had spared her life, but taken her beauty, her fiancé, and her place in society. Henry had broken their engagement within a week of seeing her altered face, unable to bear the thought of a scarred wife at his side as he pursued his political ambitions. Prudence touched her face gently, tracing the ridged flesh that still sometimes pulled painfully when she spoke or smiled. She had stopped smiling anyway, so that hardly mattered now. Turning away from her reflection, she prepared for bed, her movements precise and economical. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter. In Tombstone, perhaps, she could build something from the ashes of her old life. Dawn broke harsh and golden over the desert landscape, slanting through the thin curtains of room 3. Prudence had been awake for hours, carefully dressing in her one good dress, a simple navy blue cotton with white collar and cuffs. She arranged her honey blonde hair in a simple knot, then secured her bonnet and veil before venturing downstairs. The dining room was already busy with miners heading for an early shift and cowboys finishing a night of carousing. Prudence took a seat in the corner, ordering only coffee to save her remaining coins. The hot beverage warmed her hands through her gloves as she sipped carefully through her veil, a skill she had perfected over the past year. "Pardon me, madam," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "Might I join you? Every other table's occupied." Prudence glanced up to see a tall man in a gray duster, his broad-brimmed hat held respectfully in his hands. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt and eyes the color of a summer sky. A sheriff's badge glinted on his chest. "Of course," she murmured, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Much obliged." He settled his large frame into the chair with surprising grace. "Sheriff Yeager Wade," he introduced himself, extending his hand before seeming to think better of it and withdrawing it when she made no move to offer hers in return. "New in town?" "Yes," she replied simply. Taking another careful sip of her coffee, he nodded, respecting her reticence. The waitress brought him a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Best breakfast in town," he commented, spreading butter on a biscuit. "You should try the biscuits at least. Mrs. Holliday makes them fresh every morning. I'm fine with just coffee, thank you." Sheriff Wade studied her for a moment, his eyes curious but not unkind. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings you to Tombstone? We don't get many unaccompanied ladies arriving without purpose." Prudence hesitated. "I'm seeking employment." "What kind of work do you do?" "I can read and write very well. I kept my father's accounts for years. I can so teach children their letters." She trailed off, unsure how to continue. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully as he chewed his food. "As it happens, John Clum over at the Epitaph was just saying yesterday he needs someone who can set type and handle the accounts. His last fellow left for California, gold fever." He shook his head. "You might try there." Hope flickered in Prudence's chest. "Thank you, I shall inquire this morning." "I can take you over there after breakfast, make an introduction," he offered. She stiffened slightly. "That's very kind but unnecessary. I prefer to manage on my own." Something in her tone must have conveyed her discomfort, for he nodded easily. "Of course. Just tell him Sheriff Wade sent you." "Might help your cause." "Thank you." She finished her coffee and rose to leave. "Miss," he called after her. "I didn't catch your name." She paused at the doorway. "Fairchild, Prudence Fairchild." "Welcome to Tombstone, Miss Fairchild. Hope it treats you kindly." She nodded once and slipped away, his penetrating blue gaze following her exit with an interest she found both unsettling and, strangely, warming. The Tombstone Epitaph office was already busy when Prudence entered an hour later. A bespectacled man in shirt sleeves was barking orders at a young boy who was organizing stacks of newspapers. "Mr. Clum?" Prudence inquired, stepping forward. The man turned, adjusting his spectacles as he took in her veiled appearance. "Yes, my name is Prudence Fairchild." "Sheriff Wade suggested I inquire about employment. I understand you need someone who can set type and manage accounts." John Clum's eyebrows rose. "Sheriff Wade sent you? Well, that's something. Can you really set type, Miss Fairchild?" I've never done so professionally, but I'm a quick study and have excellent attention to detail. I have experience with accounting and excellent penmanship. Clum circled her, assessing. And you work with that. He gestured vaguely toward her veil. All the time. Prudence stiffened. Yes. My veil does not impede my work in any way. He scratched his beard. Well, Yeager's a good judge of character. Why don't you show me your penmanship? Write something out for me. He led her to a desk and provided paper and a pen. Prudence sat down and wrote a brief paragraph about her qualifications, her hand steady and her script elegant. Clum read it over her shoulder, making impressed noises. Your spelling's perfect too. That's rare out here. He tapped the paper. I can offer you $15 a week to start. Hours are long dawn till dusk most days and whenever there's breaking news. You'll do the books, help set type, proofread articles, and handle subscriptions. That suit you? $15. It was more than she had dared hope for. Yes, Mr. Clum, when would you like me to begin? Right now, if you're able. I'm short-handed and we go to press tomorrow. And so began Prudence's new life in Tombstone. The work was demanding but absorbing, leaving her little time to dwell on the past. Her small hands proved adept at setting type, and her meticulous nature made her an excellent proofreader. She took a small room at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Kendall, who asked no questions about the veil and appreciated Prudence's quiet, tidy ways. For the first time since the fire, Prudence felt useful, even content. The citizens of Tombstone eventually grew accustomed to the veiled woman who worked at the epitaph, though whispers and speculation followed her wherever she went. Some said she was a widow in perpetual mourning. Others claimed she had been attacked by Apache raiders who left her face mutilated. A few crueler souls suggested she was a former soiled dove hiding a disease that had ravaged her features. Prudence heard the whispers but forced herself to ignore them. What mattered was that she was independent, earning her own way. Still, loneliness plagued her nights, and sometimes when she removed her veil in the privacy of her room, she would touch her scars and weep for all she had lost. Sheriff Yeager Wade became a regular visitor to the epitaph offices, officially to bring news of criminal activities or town council meetings. But Prudence noticed he often lingered at her desk, making conversation about trivial matters. His kindness confused her. No man had willingly sought her company since the fire. "How are you settling in, Miss Fairchild?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against her desk as she organized subscription records. "Quite well, thank you, Sheriff. Been here over a month now." "You still haven't seen much of the town beyond this office and your boarding house." She glanced up, surprised he had noticed her routine. "I have all I need. There's a social at the church this Sunday. Good food, music. Might be nice for you to meet some of the respectable ladies of Tombstone." He shifted his weight, suddenly appearing uncomfortable. "I'd be happy to escort you if you'd allow it." Prudence's heart beat faster, fear and something dangerously like hope warring in her breast. "That's very kind, Sheriff, but I don't attend social gatherings. Because of your veil." He asked it gently, without judgment. Her fingers tightened on her pen. "People stare, they whisper. It's uncomfortable for everyone." "Not for me," he said simply. "I'd be proud to walk in with you on my arm." Prudence looked up at him, wishing he could see her expression of disbelief. "Why?" "Why what? Why would you want to escort me? There are many beautiful women in Tombstone who would gladly accept your attention." Yeager Wade smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. "I find I prefer conversation with a woman of substance over simpering and batting eyelashes." "You've got more substance than most anyone in this town, Miss Fairchild." She was grateful then for the veil that hid her blush. "Nevertheless, I must decline, but I thank you for the offer." He straightened, touching the brim of his hat. "The offer stands any time you change your mind." He turned to go, then paused. "Miss Fairchild?" "Yes, Sheriff. Whatever you're hiding from, you're safe here. I want you to know that." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her composure. "Thank you," she whispered. After he left, John Clum emerged from his office, an amused expression on his face. "Sheriff Wade's sweet on you, Miss Fairchild." "Don't be absurd," she replied, returning to her work. "Nothing absurd about it. Man's been coming in here 3 times a week since you started. Before that, I was lucky to see him once a month unless someone got shot." Clum chuckled. "You should go to that social. Do you good to get out? The citizens of Tombstone have adjusted to my presence well enough when I'm working. I see no reason to disrupt their social gatherings with my—" She gestured to her veil. "Folks are curious, sure, but they respect you. Your work here has earned that, and having Yeager Wade's regard doesn't hurt either." Clum's expression softened. "Whatever's under that veil, Miss Fairchild, it can't be as bad as hiding yourself away forever." But Prudence knew better. She had seen the revulsion in Henry's eyes, felt the withdrawal of her so-called friends in Boston society. Her scars were a reminder of tragedy, of imperfection in a world that valued women primarily for their beauty. Here in Tombstone, she had carved out a place for herself based on her skills alone. She would not risk losing that by exposing her ruined face to public scrutiny. Yet as the days passed, Sheriff Wade continued his visits, bringing her small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflowers from the desert, even a slice of apple pie from the hotel restaurant that he insisted was too good to miss. His kindness wore away at her defenses, bit by bit. "Why do you persist, Sheriff?" she asked him one day as he walked her home from work, a courtesy he had somehow established despite her initial resistance. "In what, Miss Fairchild, in these attentions? You know nothing about me." He was quiet for a moment as they walked, the evening air cool around them. "I know you're brave. Coming all this way alone takes courage. I know you're smart. John says you're the best employee he's ever had. I know you're kind. I've seen you slip coins to that orphan boy who sells matches on the corner." He glanced down at her. "And I know you're hurting. I recognize that look, even behind a veil. I carried it myself after my wife died." His honesty stunned her into silence. "I was a Texas Ranger before I came here," he continued. "My wife, Sarah, caught a fever while I was away on the trail of some outlaws. By the time I got home, she was gone. I blamed myself for years. Drank too much, took too many risks. Ended up in Tombstone because I didn't much care where I landed." "I'm sorry," Prudence said softly. "It was 5 years ago now. The pain doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you can carry without it crushing you." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Whatever happened to you, Miss Fairchild, it doesn't have to define the rest of your life." Tears welled in her eyes, and she was grateful again for the concealing veil. "You are very kind, Sheriff, but some wounds are visible for all to see, a constant reminder that cannot be escaped." "The worst wounds are the ones no one can see," he replied, "and Prudence." It was the first time he had used her given name. "I wish you'd call me Yeager when we're not in public." She couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips, though it pulled painfully at her scars. "Perhaps I will." Yeager. The weeks turned into months, and summer descended on Tombstone with brutal heat. Prudence established herself as an indispensable part of the epitaph's operations. John Clum raised her salary twice and gave her more responsibilities, including editing some of the smaller articles. Her world expanded slightly. She now greeted shopkeepers by name, exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Kendall's other boarders, and even attended an occasional lecture at the town hall, always sitting in the back, always heavily veiled, and always there was Yeager Wade, a steady presence in her life. He never pressed her about her past or what lay beneath her veil, but his eyes followed her with a warmth that made her heart flutter traitorously in her chest. She found herself looking forward to his visits, saving interesting news items to discuss with him, listening for his footsteps in the epitaph office. One blazing July afternoon, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the livery stable, the dry timber catching quickly and threatening to spread to neighboring buildings. The town's volunteer fire brigade rushed to battle the flames, forming a bucket line from the nearest well. Prudence was working late at the epitaph when she smelled the smoke. Looking out the window, she saw the crowd gathering, the orange glow in the distance, and felt her chest constrict with terror. Fire. The crackle of flames, the screams, the searing pain as burning debris fell on her, trapping her beneath it until the neighbors pulled her free. Her breath came in short gasps as the memories overwhelmed her. She gripped the edge of her desk, willing herself to remain calm, but the panic was too strong. She had to get away from the smoke, the terrifying reminder of the worst night of her life. Grabbing her reticule, she fled the office, intending to rush back to her boarding house. But the streets were chaotic, filled with people running toward the fire to help or away from it to safety. In her haste and confusion, she took a wrong turn and found herself closer to the burning stable, the heat intensifying and sparks flying through the air. "Miss Fairchild?" A familiar voice cut through her panic. Yeager was there suddenly, his face streaked with soot, his shirt sleeves rolled up. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." "I got lost," she gasped, trembling visibly now. The fire I can't understanding dawned in his eyes. Without another word, he wrapped an arm around her waist and guided her away from the blaze, moving swiftly through side streets until they reached the relative quiet of the town's small park. "Breathe," he instructed gently, keeping his arm around her. "Just breathe, you're safe." "Fire," she whispered, shaking uncontrollably. It was fire that she broke off, realizing what she'd almost revealed. "That hurt you," he finished softly. "I suspected as much." She nodded mutely, unable to speak through her terror. "Look at me, Prudence." His voice was firm but kind. When she raised her face to his, he continued, "The fire is contained. The brigade has it under control. It won't spread to the rest of the town. You're safe." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's foolish to be so afraid after all this time." "No, it isn't." He led her to a bench and sat beside her, still keeping his arm around her shoulders. "Fear has its reasons. It reminds us of dangers we've survived." They sat in silence as her breathing gradually returned to normal. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the park. From a distance, they could hear shouts indicating the fire was finally extinguished. "Thank you," she said at last, "for finding me, for understanding." "Always," he replied simply. Looking up at him, Prudence was struck by how handsome he was in the golden light of sunset, his strong features softened by compassion. For one wild moment, she wished she could be normal again, could be the kind of woman who might attract such a man without pity clouding his interest. "I should get back to the boarding house," she said, rising from the bench. "Mrs. Kendall will be worried." He stood as well, offering his arm. "May I escort you?" She placed her gloved hand on his arm, allowing herself this small pleasure. They walked in companionable silence through the streets, which were gradually returning to normal as the emergency passed. "The social at the church is happening again this Sunday," Yeager said as they approached Mrs. Kendall's boarding house. "I'd still be honored to escort you." Prudence hesitated. After today's display of weakness, perhaps he was offering out of pity, yet the look in his eyes seemed genuine, almost hopeful. "I'll consider it," she found herself saying. His smile was like the sunrise. "That's all I ask." On Sunday morning, Prudence stood before the small mirror in her room, trembling with nerves. She had sent a note to the sheriff's office yesterday, accepting his invitation to the church social. Now, she was regretting her moment of courage. She had spent her precious savings on a new dress for the occasion, a modest creation of lavender cotton with delicate white piping and a high collar. Her honey-blonde hair was arranged neatly beneath a matching bonnet, from which hung the ever-present black veil. She looked like a proper lady preparing for a social outing, except for the dark screen that hid her face from the world. A knock at the front door downstairs made her jump. Mrs. Kendall's voice floated up, greeting the sheriff warmly. Taking a deep breath, Prudence descended the stairs, clutching the banister for support. Yeager Wade stood in the entryway, hat in hand, dressed in a clean black suit instead of his usual working clothes. His eyes brightened when he saw her, a smile spreading across his face. "Miss Fairchild, you look lovely," he said with genuine admiration. "Thank you," she replied softly. "You're very kind." Mrs. Kendall beamed at them both. Don't keep her out too late, Sheriff. Though Lord knows our Miss Fairchild deserves some enjoyment after working so hard. I'll have her home at her respectable hour, madam, he promised, offering Prudence his arm. The church was only a few blocks away, its white steeple rising above the surrounding buildings. As they walked, Prudence felt the stares of passers-by, heard the whispers that followed them. She gripped Yeager's arm tighter. Ignore them, he said quietly. They're just surprised to see the mysterious Miss Fairchild at a social event. Perhaps this was a mistake, she murmured. Give it a chance, he encouraged. The ladies of the church auxiliary are good women once you get to know them, and the food is worth any amount of gossip. His easy manner calmed her somewhat, and when they reached the churchyard, she was composed enough to greet the pastor and his wife with proper decorum. The social was held outdoors beneath a canopy of canvas awnings, with tables laden with food and a small group of musicians playing lively tunes. To Prudence's surprise, most people were welcoming, if curious. Mrs. Whitford, the banker's wife, engaged her in conversation about the latest news reported in the epitaph. Mrs. Hollister, who ran the general store, complimented her dress. Even young Miss Collins, the schoolteacher, sought her opinion on books suitable for older students. See. Not so terrible, Yeager murmured as he brought her a plate of food and a cup of lemonade. They're being polite because I'm with you, she replied, carefully lifting her veil just enough to sip her lemonade. They're being polite because you've earned their respect through your work and your conduct in town, he countered. Give yourself some credit, Prudence. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough, though Prudence noticed that some of the younger women kept their distance, whispering behind their fans when they thought she wasn't looking. She had just excused herself to visit the refreshment table when she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. I don't understand what Sheriff Wade sees in her, a young woman's voice said petulantly. You can't even see her face. For all we know, she could be hideously disfigured. Or she could be wanted for crimes back east, another female voice added. Why else would someone hide their face? My money's on smallpox scars, a third voice chimed in. My cousin had it and his face was a fright afterward. Well, whatever her secret, it's clear she's ensnared our handsome sheriff somehow. Though what man would want a wife whose face he can't even see is beyond me. Prudence's hands trembled as she set down her empty cup. Wife. The very idea was absurd. Yeager was being kind, nothing more. Yet the women's cruel speculation cut deeply, reminding her why she had kept to herself for so long. She turned to leave the refreshment table and nearly collided with Yeager himself, who had apparently come looking for her. The expression on his face told her he had overheard the gossip as well. Pay them no mind, he said, loud enough for the gossiping women to hear. Small minds amuse themselves with small talk. The women scattered, their faces flushed with embarrassment at being caught. Yeager placed a gentle hand on Prudence's elbow. Would you like to leave? We don't have to stay. She nodded, suddenly exhausted by the effort of maintaining her composure. Yes, please. Instead of heading back toward the boarding house, however, Yeager guided her toward the outskirts of town, where a small creek ran through a grove of cottonwood trees. The setting sun cast everything in a warm, golden glow, and the burbling water created a peaceful soundtrack. I thought you might enjoy a moment of quiet before returning to Mrs. Kendall's, he explained, leading her to a smooth boulder beside the creek. This is one of my favorite spots in Tombstone. It's beautiful, she admitted, settling onto the boulder. I didn't realize there was anywhere so peaceful near town. Most people don't venture out this far. He sat beside her, a respectful distance between them. I come here to think sometimes when the job gets to be too much. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water flow past and listening to the rustling of the cottonwood leaves. Finally, Yeager spoke again. Those women at the church, they don't matter. Their opinions don't matter. But they do, Prudence said softly. They reflect what everyone thinks when they see me, what they imagine beneath this veil. Not everyone. She turned to look at him. What do you imagine, Sheriff Wade? He met her gaze steadily, though he could not see her eyes through the veil. "I don't waste time imagining. I know who you are, Prudence. I know your kindness, your intelligence, your courage. Whatever is beneath that veil, it doesn't change those things." Tears welled in her eyes. "You are a rare man, Yeager Wade." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just one who's lived long enough to know what matters." He hesitated, then added, "Prudence, I've grown very fond of you these past months. I hope you know that." Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "I've grown fond of you as well. Would you permit me to call on you properly? Not just walking you home from work or escorting you to church socials, but with intention." "Intention," she echoed, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Courting," he clarified, his usual confidence faltering slightly. "I'd like to court you, Prudence Fairchild." She stood abruptly, moving to the edge of the creek. "You don't know what you're asking. You don't know what I look like." He rose as well but didn't approach her. "I don't need to." "Yes, you do," she cried, frustration and longing battling within her. "Men don't court women they find repulsive, Yeager. They don't marry them. They don't. Is that what happened?" he asked quietly. "Someone rejected you because of your appearance." Prudence wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "Yes, my fiancé. After the fire, he couldn't bear to look at me, said his political ambitions couldn't withstand the scandal of a disfigured wife." Yeager's expression hardened. "Then he was a fool who never deserved you in the first place. He was being practical. Beauty matters in this world, especially for women. Not to me." He took a step toward her. "Prudence, look at me." When she did, he continued, "I've been half in love with you since the first time you corrected my grammar in one of my official reports to the Epitaph. I've fallen the rest of the way in the months since, watching you build a life here, seeing your strength and determination. I don't give a damn what's under that veil." The raw honesty in his voice shook her to her core. "You say that now, but test me then," he challenged gently. "Show me your face, Prudence. Here now, with no one else around to see. If I flinch, if I withdraw, you'll have your answer. But if I don't, if I see you, truly see you, and still want to court you, will you give us a chance?" Prudence trembled, terrified and yet yearning to believe him. No one had seen her face willingly since she left Boston, not even Mrs. Kendall, who respected her privacy enough to never ask about the veil. The thought of revealing herself voluntarily made her knees weak with fear. "I can't," she whispered. Yeager nodded, disappointment clear in his eyes but his voice gentle. "I understand, and I won't press you. But know this, Prudence Fairchild, my feelings won't change. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The walk back to the boarding house was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. At the door, Yeager took her hand and pressed a kiss to her gloved fingers. "Thank you for accompanying me today," he said formally. "I hope you enjoyed at least parts of it." "I did," she assured him. "Thank you for understanding. About the other matter," he smiled, though a shadow of sadness lingered in his eyes. "Good night, Prudence." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the twilight sky, and felt a terrible sense of loss. He had offered her something precious: acceptance, affection, possibly even love, and she had been too afraid to grasp it. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, replaying Yeager's words in her mind. "Test me then. Show me your face." Could she trust him? Could she bear it if he, too, recoiled from her scars? The next morning she went to work as usual, though her mind was elsewhere. She made errors in the typesetting that John Clum had to correct, forgot to record a subscription payment, and dropped an entire tray of sorted letters. "What's got into you today, Miss Fairchild?" Clum asked with concern. "You're not yourself." "I apologize, Mr. Clum. I didn't sleep well." He studied her for a moment. "This wouldn't have anything to do with your appearance at the church social with our sheriff, would it? The whole town's talking about it," she sighed. "People have so little to occupy their minds." "Oh, I don't know." A mysterious veiled woman and the town's most eligible bachelor make quite the story. He smiled kindly. "For what it's worth, I think Wade's a good man, the best kind." "Yes," she agreed softly. "He is." The door to the Epitaph office opened then, and Yeager himself walked in, his expression serious. "John, Miss Fairchild," he greeted them. "I need to place a notice in tomorrow's paper. There's been an outbreak of violence in the mining camp north of town. 2 men dead in a claim dispute." "I'll write it up right away," Clum said, moving toward his desk. "Any suspects?" As the men discussed the details, Prudence tried to focus on her work, but she was acutely aware of Yeager's presence. When he finished his business with Clum, he approached her desk. "Miss Fairchild," he said formally, "I'm afraid I won't be able to walk you home today. I'll be riding out to the mining camp to investigate further." "Of course," she replied, equally formal. "Be careful, Sheriff." His expression softened slightly. "Always am." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I meant what I said yesterday, Prudence. All of it." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and left the office, the bell over the door jingling in his wake. For the next 3 days, Yeager was absent from town, engaged in his investigation at the mining camp. Prudence found herself watching the door each time the bell jingled, hoping to see his tall figure. By the 3rd day, worry had begun to gnaw at her. The mining camps could be dangerous places, ruled more by whiskey and guns than by law. On the evening of the 3rd day, just as she was preparing to leave the office, the door burst open and a young deputy rushed in. "Mr. Clum, the sheriff's back, but he's been shot." "Doc Holliday's tending to him now." Prudence's heart seemed to stop. "Shot? How badly?" The deputy glanced at her, surprised by her vehemence. "Took a bullet in the shoulder, lost a lot of blood on the ride back. Doc says he'll live, but it was a close thing." Without a word to Clum, Prudence grabbed her reticule and rushed past the deputy into the street. The doctor's office was only a block away, and she covered the distance at a near run, heedless of the stares her haste attracted. Dr. Holliday's office was crowded with deputies and concerned citizens when she arrived. She pushed her way through, ignoring the mutters of surprise at her uncharacteristic behavior. "I need to see him," she said to the harried-looking receptionist. "Sheriff Wade, please." "He's not receiving visitors, miss. Doctor's orders. He needs rest." "Please," Prudence repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "Just for a moment. I need to know he's all right." Something in her desperate tone must have moved the receptionist, for she sighed and gestured toward a door. "5 minutes, no more. He's still weak from the blood loss." Prudence slipped through the door into a small, dimly lit examination room. Yeager lay on a narrow bed, his chest and left shoulder swathed in bandages. His face was pale beneath his tan, his eyes closed. For a terrible moment she thought he wasn't breathing, then his chest rose slightly and his eyes fluttered open. "Prudence," he murmured, his voice raspy. She moved to his bedside, her knees weak with relief. "The deputy said you'd been shot. I had to see for myself that you were alive." A faint smile touched his lips. "Takes more than 1 bullet to kill me. Had 3 Apaches shoot at me once back in Texas. Survived that too." Tears welled in her eyes and she reached out impulsively to take his hand. "Don't joke, you might have died. But I didn't." His fingers curled around hers weakly. "And now I have the pleasure of seeing you by my side, almost worth getting shot for." "Stop it," she choked, the tears now flowing freely behind her veil. "This isn't funny, Yeager. You could have died without ever knowing." She trailed off, overwhelmed by the realization of how close she had come to losing him forever. "Without knowing what?" he prompted softly. Prudence looked at him, this brave, kind man who had come to mean so much to her, and made a decision. Glancing over her shoulder to ensure the door was closed, she reached up with trembling hands and slowly lifted her veil. Yeager's eyes widened, but not with the disgust or pity she had feared. Instead, they filled with a tenderness that took her breath away. The right side of her face was a landscape of scars, the skin puckered and red where the fire had burned away her once smooth flesh. The damage extended from her temple down to her jaw, pulling slightly at the corner of her mouth and leaving a small bare patch in her hairline. "Now you know," she whispered, fighting the urge to cover herself again. "This is why I hide." Yeager raised his uninjured arm, his hand gentle as he touched her scarred cheek. "Prudence," he breathed, "you're beautiful." She closed her eyes, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "Please don't lie to me, not you, I'm not lying." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "These scars, they're part of you, part of your story. They show what you've survived. How could I find that anything but beautiful?" Opening her eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity in his face. No revulsion, no pity, only acceptance and something deeper, something that made her heart race. "I've imagined this moment," he admitted softly. "Not what you looked like, but the moment you might trust me enough to show me. I never imagined it would be in Doc Holliday's examination room with a bullet hole in my shoulder." A watery laugh escaped her. "I never imagined it at all. I thought I would wear the veil forever." "Will you?" he asked, his eyes serious now. "Forever?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I've hidden for so long. Whatever you decide, it changes nothing for me." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "I love you, Prudence Fairchild, veil or no veil, scars or no scars. I love the woman you are." The words she had never expected to hear again in her lifetime made her breath catch. Yeager, a knock at the door interrupted her. "5 minutes are up," the receptionist called. Hastily, Prudence lowered her veil, composing herself just as the door opened. "The sheriff needs rest," the receptionist said firmly. "You can come back tomorrow." Prudence nodded, rising from her seat beside the bed. "I'll return tomorrow," she promised Yeager, squeezing his hand once more before releasing it. "I'll be waiting," he replied, his eyes conveying what words could not in the presence of others. She walked back to her boarding house in a daze, her mind and heart full. Yeager had seen her face her ruined, scarred face and still declared his love. It seemed impossible, yet the memory of his touch, so gentle on her damaged skin, told her it was real. That night, for the first time in over a year, Prudence slept without her veil, the weight of her secret lifted from her shoulders. The next day dawned bright and clear, a perfect September morning. Prudence dressed with unusual care, selecting her best day dress of deep blue that matched Yeager's eyes. She arranged her hair neatly but left her veil on her dressing table, covering her face instead with a light shawl that she could remove once she reached the doctor's office. Mrs. Kendall nearly dropped her teacup when Prudence descended for breakfast. "Miss Fairchild, my veil, yes," Prudence said calmly. "I've decided not to wear it today." The older woman recovered quickly. "Well, it's about time, if you don't mind my saying so. Plenty of folks in this town bear scars inside and out. No need to hide yourself away." Prudence smiled, touched by the landlady's matter-of-fact acceptance. "Thank you, Mrs. Kendall. Going to see the sheriff, are you?" Mrs. Kendall asked with a knowing smile. "Good. Man could use some cheering up after what he's been through." Stepping onto the street without her veil was terrifying. Prudence kept the shawl pulled forward, shadowing her face as she walked briskly toward the doctor's office. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if she were walking naked through the town. People stared, of course they did, but most simply nodded in greeting, perhaps too surprised by the change to comment. At the doctor's office, the same receptionist was on duty. Her eyes widened slightly at Prudence's altered appearance, but she merely said, "The sheriff's awake and asking for you. Doc says he can have visitors for 30 minutes at a time now." Prudence thanked her and made her way to Yeager's room. He was sitting up in bed today, looking less pale though still weak. His face lit up when he saw her. "You came," he said, as if he had doubted it. "Of course I did." She closed the door behind her and slowly lowered the shawl, revealing her face fully. I decided to try without the veil." Yeager's smile was like sunshine. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Prudence Fairchild." She moved to sit beside his bed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I was interrupted yesterday before I could respond to what you said. That I love you." He prompted, his eyes intent on her face. "Yes," she took a deep breath. "I love you too, Yeager. I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Then we have a problem. We do?" "Yes." His blue eyes twinkled with mischief. "Doc says I'm confined to this bed for at least another week. That's a week I can't properly court you as I'd intended." Relief and joy bubbled up inside her, emerging as laughter. "I think we're well past the traditional courtship stage, Sheriff Wade." "Perhaps," he agreed, tugging gently on her hand until she leaned closer. "But there are certain traditions I'd like to observe. Such as this one, for instance." He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Prudence froze for an instant, overwhelmed by the sensation after so long without human touch. Then she melted into the kiss, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Yeager's expression was one of wonder. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time you corrected my spelling," she laughed softly. "And I've been wanting you to, though I would never have admitted it." His expression grew more serious as he reached up to touch her scarred cheek. "You know there will be talk, stares, questions. Not everyone will be kind." "I know," she admitted. "But if you can look at me without flinching, perhaps I can face the rest of the world too, not all at once, but gradually." "I'll be right beside you," he promised, "for as long as you'll have me." In that moment, in a small room in Dr. Holliday's office, with the sounds of Tombstone's busy streets filtering through the window, Prudence felt the last walls around her heart crumble away. The scars would always be there, a map of her past etched into her skin. But perhaps they could also be the beginning of something new, something beautiful and unexpected, like love in the wild frontier. Yeager's recovery was slow but steady. Prudence visited him daily, sometimes still wearing her veil in public but always removing it in the privacy of his room. Each day, he seemed stronger, more impatient to return to his duties and to properly begin their courtship. 2 weeks after the shooting, Doc Holliday finally declared him well enough to leave the sickroom, though his arm remained in a sling, and he was forbidden from any strenuous activity for another month. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you got yourself shot on purpose, Sheriff," Doc drawled as he gave his final instructions. "Never seen a man so cheerful about taking a bullet." Yeager grinned, glancing at Prudence, who waited by the door. "Had some unexpected benefits, Doc." The doctor followed his gaze, his expression softening when he saw Prudence. Like most of Tombstone by now, he had heard the rumors about the sheriff and the formerly veiled lady from the epitaph. Unlike most, he had witnessed their growing attachment firsthand during Prudence's daily visits. "Miss Fairchild," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Take good care of our lawman, he's too stubborn for his own good." "I'll do my best, Doctor," she promised, only a slight blush betraying her awareness of the implication in his words. They stepped out into the October sunshine together, Yeager immediately offering his good arm for her to hold. She took it without hesitation, though she had opted to wear her veil for this first public outing. One step at a time, she reminded herself. "Where to?" he asked. "I'm a free man at last." "Perhaps lunch at the hotel," she suggested. "You must be tired of the doctor's bland cooking." "Sounds perfect." As they walked through town, Prudence was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. News of their attachment had spread quickly in the small community, and the sight of the sheriff openly escorting the mysterious Miss Fairchild caused quite a stir. She tightened her grip on Yeager's arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You're doing fine," he murmured, covering her hand with his. "Just remember, half of them are just jealous that I've managed to win the affections of the smartest woman in Tombstone." His words made her smile behind her veil. "And the other half, jealous that you've tamed the most stubborn lawman west of the Mississippi," he replied with a wink. The Grand Hotel's dining room was busy with the lunch crowd, but the maitre d' quickly found them a table by the window. Heads turned as they made their way through the room, conversation briefly halting before resuming at a louder volume, no doubt speculating about the unlikely couple. Once they were seated and had placed their orders, Yeager reached across the table to take her hand. "How does it feel?" "Being out in public together, strange," she admitted. "But not unpleasant, better than I feared. And the veil," he asked gently, Will you always wear it in public? Prudence considered the question seriously. Not always, I think, but sometimes yes. There are days when I don't have the strength to face the stares and questions. Will that be a problem? Never, he assured her, squeezing her hand. Whatever makes you comfortable, Prudence, that's all that matters to me. Their meal arrived, and Prudence carefully arranged her veil to allow her to eat without revealing her entire face, a skill she had perfected over the past year. They spoke of ordinary things, the news of the town, Yeager's plans to return to limited duty next week, a book Prudence had recently read. It was the most normal, public interaction she had experienced since the fire, and despite her initial nervousness, she found herself enjoying it immensely. Yeager had a gift for putting her at ease, for making her forget at least temporarily the barrier between herself and the rest of the world. As they were finishing their meal, the dining room door opened to admit a group of well-dressed businessmen from the looks of their fine suits and confident bearing. One of them, a handsome man with auburn hair and an arrogant tilt to his chin, stopped short when his gaze fell on their table. "Prudence," he exclaimed, his voice carrying across the room. "Prudence Fairchild, is that you?" Prudence froze, her fork clattering against her plate. That voice so familiar, yet belonging to a past she had tried desperately to leave behind. Slowly, she raised her head to confirm what she already knew. "Henry," she acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeager's posture stiffened immediately, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the man who approached their table. "A friend of yours?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Not a friend, my former fiancé." Understanding dawned in Yeager's eyes, followed by a flash of anger quickly controlled. He rose to his feet as Henry reached their table, positioning himself slightly in front of Prudence in a subtle but unmistakable protective gesture. "Miss Fairchild," Henry said, his voice oozing charm despite the shock still evident in his eyes. "I can scarcely believe it. When I heard rumors of a veiled lady working at the local newspaper, I never imagined it might be you." "What brings you to Tombstone, Mr. Blackwell?" Prudence asked, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the turmoil inside her. "Business, my dear. My father's bank is considering investments in some of the more promising mines." He glanced at Yeager, taking in the badge and the arm in a sling. "Won't you introduce me to your companion?" Prudence stood as well, drawing strength from Yeager's presence at her side. "Sheriff Yeager Wade, this is Henry Blackwell of Boston. Mr. Blackwell, Sheriff Wade." Yeager extended his hand, his grip visibly firm when Henry shook it. "Mr. Blackwell, you're a long way from Boston, indeed." Henry's gaze returned to Prudence, his eyes flicking to her veil with poorly disguised curiosity. "As is Miss Fairchild. I must say, Prudence, your disappearance caused quite a stir in society. Your aunt was beside herself." "I wrote to Aunt Margaret," Prudence replied. "I explained my decision to start fresh elsewhere." "Yes, but Tombstone," Henry laughed incredulously, "hardly the place for a lady of your upbringing." His expression softened into something like pity. "Though I suppose, given the circumstances, your options were limited." Yeager stiffened beside her, but Prudence placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. Taking a deep breath, she reached up and slowly lifted her veil, revealing her scarred face fully to her former fiancé. Henry's reaction was everything she had feared in the past: a sharp intake of breath, a barely concealed flinch, a flicker of revulsion quickly masked by false sympathy. "Oh, Prudence," he murmured. "Still so, unfortunate. The doctors said the scars might fade with time." "They were wrong," she said simply. "This is my face now, Henry. It has been for over a year." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "You seem to have made a life for yourself here, at least. That's commendable, more than commendable," Yeager interjected, his voice hard. "Miss Fairchild is the most respected woman in Tombstone. Her work at the Epitaph has improved the quality of reporting throughout the territory." Henry's eyes narrowed slightly at Yeager's tone. "I see you have a champion, Prudence. How fortunate." I have someone who sees me for who I am, she corrected him quietly. Not for what I look like or what social advantages I might bring. The barb hit home, Henry's face flushed with anger or embarrassment. I see your experience has made you bitter. Understandable, I suppose. Not bitter, Henry. Just clearer about what truly matters. She lowered her veil once more, not out of shame, but because she was done with this conversation. If you'll excuse us, Sheriff Wade is still recovering from his injuries, and I should see him back to his lodgings. Henry stepped back, his manner stiff with wounded pride. Of course, perhaps we'll see each other again during my stay. Perhaps, she replied noncommittally. Good day, Mr. Blackwell. Yeager left money on the table for their meal and offered his arm to Prudence. They walked out of the dining room with heads held high, though Prudence was trembling slightly by the time they reached the street. Are you all right? Yeager asked once they were out of earshot. Yes, she said, surprised to find it was true. I am seeing him again. It was less devastating than I imagined it would be. He's a pompous ass, Yeager stated bluntly, making her laugh despite the tension of the moment. He is that, she agreed. But seeing him again helped me realize something. When he broke our engagement, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would ever look at me with anything but horror or pity. I was wrong. Yeager stopped walking and turned to face her. Right there on the main street of Tombstone, with passers-by all around, he reached up and gently lifted her veil, tucking it back over her bonnet. His eyes never left hers, filled with such tenderness that her breath caught. Damn right you were, he said softly. Then, to her utter shock, he leaned down and pressed his lips to the worst of her scars, the puckered flesh at her temple. This, he said, kissing another scar on her cheek, does not, another kiss along her jawline, define you. Each gentle kiss was like healing fire burning away the last of her shame. Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. She was vaguely aware of people stopping to stare, of gasps and whispers, but for the first time she didn't care. Yeager, she whispered, people are watching. Let them, he replied, pressing one final kiss to the corner of her mouth where the scars pulled slightly. Let them see that the most beautiful woman in Tombstone is loved exactly as she is. You're a madman, she said with a watery laugh, kissing a scarred woman in the middle of Allen Street. No, he corrected her, his blue eyes serious now. I'm a man who knows treasure when he finds it. He took her hands in his. Marry me, Prudence. Not a year from now, not 6 months from now. As soon as you're willing. Her heart seemed to stop, then race ahead at double speed. You can't be serious. We haven't even properly courted. I nearly died with a bullet in my shoulder, he interrupted. Life's too short and too uncertain out here to waste time on conventions. I love you, you love me. The rest is just details. Put that way, it seemed so simple. Prudence looked up at this man, this strong, kind, unflinchingly loyal man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and only loved her more for it, and realized she had no reason to wait. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Yeager Wade. His answering smile was radiant. Heedless of their audience, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, a kiss full of promise and passion that left her breathless. Well now, drawled a familiar voice, I reckon that's one way to announce an engagement. They broke apart to find John Clum standing nearby, an amused expression on his face. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered, watching the unexpected display of affection between the sheriff and the formerly veiled lady. John, Yeager acknowledged with a grin that suggested he wasn't at all sorry for the public spectacle. Miss Fairchild has done me the honor of agreeing to become Mrs. Wade. About time, Clum replied with a chuckle. Though I have to say, Miss Fairchild, I'll be sorry to lose my best employee to matrimony. Who says you have to lose me? Prudence asked, her confidence growing by the second. I see no reason why a married woman can't continue to work if her husband has no objections. Yeager squeezed her hand. No objections whatsoever. Your work makes you happy. Why would I want to change that? John Clum's eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, that's progressive thinking, Sheriff, but I'm all for it if Miss Fairchild wants to continue at the epitaph. "I do," she confirmed. "Though perhaps we could discuss a slightly different schedule once we're married." "Whatever you like," Clum agreed readily. "Now, when's this wedding to be? The epitaph should announce it properly." Prudence looked to Yeager, who shrugged. "I'd marry her today if the Reverend was available. But I suppose some planning is in order." 2 weeks, Prudence decided. "Long enough to arrange things properly, but not so long that you change your mind." Yeager laughed. "Not a chance of that, my love." 2 weeks later, on a crisp November afternoon, the small church in Tombstone was filled to capacity as Sheriff Yeager Wade took Prudence Fairchild as his bride. She wore a simple gown of ivory satin with a lace overlay, her honey blonde hair adorned with a crown of desert wildflowers instead of the traditional orange blossoms, and she wore no veil. Her scars were visible to all who attended, but as she walked down the aisle on John Clum's arm, he having volunteered to give her away in the absence of family, Prudence held her head high. The whispers that followed her were not of pity or horror, but of admiration for her courage and for the obvious devotion shining in the sheriff's eyes as he watched her approach. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice filling the small church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Yeager Wade and Prudence Fairchild in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but deeply moving. When it came time for Yeager to kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened miners and cowboys in attendance. And after he kissed her lips, he placed another gentle kiss on each of her scars, just as he had done that day on Allen Street, a silent affirmation of his love for all of her. "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Yeager Wade," the Reverend announced to applause and cheers. The celebration that followed at the Grand Hotel was the social event of the year in Tombstone. Even Henry Blackwell attended, though he kept his distance from the happy couple, his expression sour as he watched Prudence dancing in her new husband's arms, her scarred face alight with joy. "Your former fiancé looks like he swallowed something unpleasant," Yeager observed as they waltzed past the Boston banker. "He's realizing what he gave up," Prudence replied, no longer bitter about Henry's rejection. "But I'm grateful he did. If he hadn't, I might never have come west. I might never have found you." Yeager pulled her closer, mindful of his still healing shoulder. "Then I owe the man a debt of gratitude, though I still think he's a pompous ass." She laughed, the sound bright and unreserved, no longer concerned about drawing attention to herself. "My husband, the diplomat." "Your husband, the happiest man in the Arizona Territory," he corrected, bending to press a kiss to her forehead. As the celebration continued around them, Prudence looked up at the man who had taught her to see beyond her scars, who had lifted her veil of shame and kissed each mark with reverence. In his eyes, she saw not what she had lost, but all she had gained: love, acceptance, a future bright with promise. The scars would always be there, a map of her past etched into her skin. But now they told a different story, not just of survival, but of love found in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. A love that saw beyond appearances to the heart beneath. 5 years later, Prudence sat on the front porch of their modest home on the outskirts of Tombstone, watching as Yeager taught their 4-year-old son, Matthew, to ride his new pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at her feet with a set of wooden blocks, her honey blonde curls gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Not too fast, Matthew," she called as the boy urged his pony into a trot, his father walking alongside with a guiding hand on the reins. "Remember what happened last time?" "I remember, Mama," the boy called back, his smile revealing a missing front tooth. "Papa says I'm a natural, though." "That he is," Yeager confirmed with a proud grin, got his mother's determination. Life had changed dramatically since that day. Yeager had lifted her veil and kissed her scars in the middle of Allen Street. They had married, built a home, and started a family. Yeager still served as sheriff, though there was talk of him running for territorial legislature next year. Prudence continued to work part-time at the Epitaph, having become something of a local celebrity for her editorial columns on women's suffrage and educational reform. Her scars were still visible, they always would be, but she no longer hid them. Some days she wore a light veil when the sun was harsh, or when she simply didn't have the energy to field curious glances from newcomers to town. Most days, though, she went barefaced, her scars as much a part of her as her honey blonde hair or her green eyes. The children never questioned their mother's appearance. To them, Mama's face was simply Mama's face, unique and beloved. Matthew occasionally asked about the special marks, as he called them, and she told him a simplified version of the fire, emphasizing the lesson that appearances matter far less than character. Yeager handed the pony's reins to his son and walked over to join Prudence on the porch, scooping up little Elizabeth on his way. "She's getting heavy," he commented, settling the giggling toddler on his hip. "She's growing like a weed," Prudence agreed, making room for him on the bench beside her. Just like her brother. He sat down, Elizabeth immediately scrambling to get down and return to her blocks. Yeager put his arm around Prudence's shoulders, pulling her close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that he was giving her the life she deserved. "Very," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm beginning to think we may need a bigger house soon." He pulled back slightly to look at her, eyebrows raised in question. "Oh," Prudence smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently against her stomach. "Dr. Holliday confirmed it yesterday. We're expecting again sometime in early spring." Yeager's face lit up with joy. "Really?" "Prudence, that's wonderful news." He bent to kiss her, his lips warm and familiar against hers. Then, as he had done countless times over the past 5 years, he pressed gentle kisses to each of her scars. "I love you," he murmured against her skin. "All of you." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me the courage to step out from behind my veil." They sat together on the porch, watching their children play as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Prudence Wade, once hidden behind a veil of scars and shame, now faced the world openly, her scarred face a testament not to tragedy but to resilience, to second chances, and to love that sees beyond the surface to the beauty within.